Hello everyone. Everything altered that night in unexpected ways. It all began when my stepmother, Jessica, asked me to stay at home while my dad went fishing as he usually did. Seemed normal at the moment. After all, most weekends were spent alone. However, I had no idea that this night would result in something so unusual. A night that would test the boundaries of our relationship and change me forever. In order for me to continue sharing more amazing genuine tales like this one with you, please make sure you subscribe to my channel. Additionally, because this narrative is going to be so fascinating, make sure to watch this video through to the very finish. It was unusually quiet in the house that morning. The absence of my dad's customary presence made the quiet feel odd. I was about to unwind after finishing my homework when Jessica beckoned me into the living room. "I need your assistance with something," she said softly. It's almost too informal. She was clearly nervous. However, I was unable to determine why. Paused for a moment. "What are you in need of?" I inquired, making his way to her seat. Jessica was generally a calm person. However, something felt different today. She grinned. But my heart was pounding because of the passion in her eyes. "Please take a seat," I said, she said, patting the pillow next her. I followed her instructions, not sure what was going to happen, but interested in what was going on. Jessica reclined. She crossed her knees and gave me a look of intensity one had never seen in her before. "You've matured greatly. You are aware of that," I said, she said. She spoke in a light tone. However, the underlying significance of the words made them feel weighty. "You've changed since I knew you as a little boy." A beat skipped in my chest. She was not like this. Our relationship had always been cordial, informal partnership, but it felt risky today. "Suppose," I muttered, not sure how to react. She leaned a little closer. She never took her eyes from mine. "Actually, no." She was adamant. "You've evolved. And I believe we are both aware of it." I got a chill from the way she stated it. There was an odd tension in the room. Furthermore, I had no idea how to break it. "Jessica, what are you attempting to express?" I inquired, forcing the question at last. I had to comprehend what was going on. Why did the atmosphere seem so heavy with unsaid words? Just for a second, she didn't answer. She merely gazed at me. I'm looking for the proper words with my eyes. With a groan, she got to her feet, moving toward the window. "For the weekend, your dad is away." Silently, she said, gazing out into the garden. "Only the two of us are present." Gave a nod. I had no idea where this discussion was going. However, I felt a knot in my stomach tighten. She looked over at me. Her face was unreadable. "I've been thinking, she started. She spoke softly yet steadily. "I've wanted to discuss a few things with you. Things that, until now, I've never dared to speak." I took a deep breath. "Such as?" She took a step forward. She fixed her gaze on mine. "Similar to us." "Simply," she said. The word lingered in the atmosphere. My heart was pounding. What did she mean? This was illogical. I made an effort to laugh it off. However, my voice sounded wobbly. "What are you saying?" Jessica gave a little smile. My stomach turned over when I saw that knowing smile. "You've also observed it, have you not?" she inquired. She said softly, "How our relationship has evolved. We are no longer merely stepson and stepmother." My head was whirling, attempting to understand what she was saying. However, I knew in my heart exactly what she was referring to. I had also sensed it. The oblique looks, the touches that linger. However, I consistently ignored such emotions. Believed they were fake. "I have no idea what you're discussing." I said a falsehood. My voice was hardly audible. She took another stride. Her presence was tremendous. The room felt much too small all of a sudden. "Indeed, you do." Softly, she said. She delicately touched my arm with her fingers. "You also sensed it." I got up suddenly, moving away from her, attempting to declutter my mind. "Jessica, this is absurd," I said. My voice was shaking. "My stepmother is you. We are unable to. We ought not to." She didn't give up though. She trailed after me, bringing us closer together once more. "Why not?" she muttered. Her intense eyes were blazing. "Both of us are grown-ups. No one else's rules need to apply to us." Gave a headshake. I was attempting to fight the urge to get nearer to her. "No, this is incorrect," I demanded. However, even as I uttered the words, I sensed my determination waning. "However, what if it is?" she retorted. She reached out and touched my cheek. I was startled by the contact, and I was frozen for a second. She was entangling us in her web, trapping us. I wanted to push her away by saying no, to flee the room and have no memory of this incident. However, I was unable to. I was stuck there for some reason, and for that I detested myself. I had a persistent sense that things were getting out of hand. The household tension became intolerable. Each time I saw Jessica, I could feel the pressure of our silence bearing down on me, choking me. But I had no idea how to stop the sluggish or face it. We are both drawn inexorably toward something perilous. The days blended into one another. Every conversation felt burdened, as if we were treading on a thin line. I made an effort to stay away. Do not spend as much time alone with her as you can. However, it wasn't simple. She always found a way to stay in touch, to draw attention to herself. It may have been a casual pat on the arm, or the way she glanced across the room at me. It was there all the time. There was a smoldering tension that persisted. The night that everything changed then arrived. My father was working late. I was also making an effort to hide in my room. Hopefully, if I stayed away from her long enough, everything would return to normal. But in the back of your mind, I was aware that would not occur. She was moving about downstairs and I could hear it. A faint background sound from the television. I could hear the ticking of the clock on my wall. Every second drags on, making reality more difficult to ignore. I considered giving a friend a call, coming up with a reason to go. However, I was unable to answer the phone for some reason. Outside my room I discovered myself hearing the quiet that had descended upon the home. It was too silent, too still. I made the choice that would alter everything at that point. I went downstairs. Every step feels more burdensome than the last. Jessica occupied the couch. She held a glass of wine. She stared at the TV, her eyes averted. At first she didn't notice me. Or perhaps she did, but acted as though they didn't. At the bottom of the stairs I paused, uncertain on what to say or do. Then she raised her head. My eyes met hers, and I was aware that there was no going back. "Not able to sleep?" she inquired. She said softly. It's almost too informal. My heart raced because of something in the way she said it, just as it had on the first day. I muttered. I don't trust myself to continue. I went to the couch and took a seat, keeping as much distance as possible between us. However, even at that distance, the underlying tension was palpable to me. For a while we sat in silence. The TV's soft hum is the sole sound. I sensed that she was observing me. Her gaze lingered on me in a way that caused a tingling sensation on my skin. I had no idea what to do. Found it difficult to speak up without making matters worse. However, that was before I could speak. She said it again. "We have been on my mind." Softly, she said. She hardly raised her voice above a whisper. A beat skipped in my chest. "Jessica, we are unable to." Got begun. But before I could finish, she interrupted. "Why not?" she inquired, turning to look directly at me. "We both know that there is a connection between us, so why are we acting as though it doesn't exist?" Her remarks really got to me. I wanted to argue, to inform her of her error, that this was not the way to proceed. However, the reality was, I was no longer strong enough to resist it. I had also sensed it. The odd attraction between us has simply gotten stronger. I had made an effort to ignore it, make me believe that wasn't real. Now, however, sitting with her here, I was no longer able to deny it. "This is not possible," I said, but my voice was unconvinced. Even as I was talking, they were falsehoods and I knew it. She bent closer. Between us, her hand was resting on the pillow. "We're not doing improperly," she muttered. She spoke in a deep, deep voice. "Nobody is being harmed by us." Gave a headshake, attempting to dispel the haze that had descended upon my mind. "However, it's incorrect." I made a feeble argument. She put her hand on mine and reached out. I felt a surge of electricity from her touch. "Who is in charge of determining good and wrong?" she inquired. She never took her eyes from mine. I took a deep breath. My heart is pounding. To tell her to stop, I longed to draw away. However, I was unable to. Froze. Caught in the moment. By the emotions I had long suppressed. "We are not bound by the rules of others," she muttered. She traced lines on the back of my hand with her fingertips. "We are able to determine what is right for ourselves." I shut my eyes, attempting to ignore her voice, the way her touch felt. However, it was useless. The barriers I had erected around myself were coming down. Furthermore, I had no idea how to stop it. Before I had a chance to speak, before I had the strength to break free, she bent closer. She muttered while her lips brushed my ear. "Don't feel it too, tell me." I got a chill from what she said, and I detested the way my body reacted to her. I wanted to give in so badly. I protested by opening my mouth, to let her know that this was incorrect, that this was impossible for us. However, nothing was said. I couldn't help but look at her. As our eyes met, I felt my breath catch in my throat. The moment dragged on. With every second that goes by, the tension between us increases. Without giving it much thought, without preparation, leaning in, I gave her a kiss. First it was soft, tentative, as if we were both trying things out, not sure what would come next. However, the kiss soon became more intense. As we gave in to the long simmering yearning, the temperature between us rose. I reached out and touched her waist. Her fingers became tangled in my hair and I pulled her closer. Our surroundings appeared to vanish. Just the two of us were engrossed in the intensity of the moment. I was aware that it was incorrect. We were aware that we had crossed a line from which we would never return. But I was unable to stop. I was unwilling to stop. The kiss grew more intense. My head was racing with 1,000 contradictory ideas. I was aware of the hazard. We were playing with fire and I knew it. A part of me, however, didn't care and had desired this for longer than I was prepared to acknowledge. When we eventually parted ways, we were both having trouble breathing. Our faces are just a few inches apart. She had black eyes, packed with an unidentified substance. And I was aware that our relationship would never be the same. "I've had this desire for a very long time," she muttered. "My flesh feels the warmth of her breath." "I'm sure you have too." I didn't answer. I was unable to. I couldn't take the truth any longer. Too much to handle. I simply nodded. The weight of what we had just done crept over me, and my heart began to race. Even so, though, it wasn't over, I knew. The kiss had been just the start. There was more. More would constantly come. After that evening, between us, everything changed. I was unable to maintain the same gaze on Jessica. Each time our gazes locked, the heat surged through me. A reminder of our past actions and the implicit promise of future events. There was a sense of danger in the air throughout the house. Something we both knew but were afraid to publicly accept. Intense days went by. Awkward quiet. I stayed as far away as possible. However, it was impossible to stay away from her entirely. Each flick of her hand, the tension that simmered just below the surface, felt like it was about to be ignited by every glance. I was aware that something wasn't right. However, I was unable to deny the pull that existed between us. Despite my best efforts, one afternoon while my father was out once more, the house was so quiet that it was intolerable. The living room was being paced by me. I'm using the TV to divert my attention. However, my mind kept returning to her. The kisses, memories. The sensation of her lips on mine. How my heart had pounded. Everything was too much. I was ashamed of myself for considering it. But I was unable to stop. I was on the verge of going crazy. Behind me, I heard her footsteps. Jessica was standing in the doorway as I turned around. Her face was unreadable. Just for a second, neither of us said anything. There was a lot of tension between us, weighed down by all that was not uttered. "We must speak." Last she said. She said softly, almost apprehensive. Gave a nod. This conversation was unavoidable. Even if I wasn't prepared. Concurred. My throat constricted. "Yes, we do." She approached the couch. Sighing, he sat down. I did the same, occupying the opposite seat from her, maintaining a cautious distance. My chest was thumping with my heart. I was also unable to look her in the eyes. I had no idea where to begin. I was at a loss for words that would improve the situation. "I am aware that things have changed," he started. She put her hands together in her lap. "Additionally, I don't want you to feel uneasy. I don't want that at all." I took a deep breath. "My mouth is parched. I'm not sure how to feel." I acknowledged. I hardly raised my voice above a whisper. "Mean. This isn't typical." "Correct. This is not how we should feel." Jessica's gaze lowered to her hand. Her face was worried. "Am aware." Softly she said. "However, we cannot just disregard it either. Can we?" I had nothing to say to her. It was the truth. I had no idea what we were meant to do. It all felt wrong. However, simultaneously, something inside of me didn't want it to end. I was unable to describe it. Couldn't make sense of it. However, the emotions were present, real and indisputable. She moved on the sofa, bending a little forward. "I can't stop thinking about that night." She admitted it. She hardly raised her voice above a whisper. "I can't get it off my mind." My throat tightened each breath. I wanted to let her know that I too gave it some thought, that it plagued me at all times. However, I found it difficult to pronounce the words. "Whether." I simply nodded. My heart is pounding. We were silent for a long time, filled with the burden of all that we chose not to say. I sensed the strain rising once more. The same perilous attraction that had initially brought us here. And before I could stop myself, I said, "I also consider it." Before I could retract the words, they were out of my mouth. And after they were said, they couldn't be undone. Jessica's gaze briefly lifted to mine. And at that precise moment, I was aware that there was no turning back. We had gone too far. We were now perched on the brink of something even more perilous. At first, she remained silent. However, I could tell everything I needed to know from the expression in her eyes. It was hot in there, a requirement that was similar to mine. And I was scared. However, simultaneously, I couldn't help but be excited by it. "This cannot continue," I said. My voice was tremulous. But even while I was saying it, I wasn't sure I thought it was true. Jessica never took her eyes from mine. "Am aware," she muttered. "However, we have already arrived. Do we not?" The space seemed extremely cramped. The air is too dense. I was itching to run, to create as much separation as possible between us. However, I was immobile. It wasn't she that ensnared me, but according to my own wishes. There was too much of a draw between us, too strong to resist. Before I realized what was going on, she leaned closer. Her face is just centimeters away from mine. Her breath was palpable on my skin, soft and warm. My heart was thumping in my chest. For a moment, I hoped that by stopping it from pulling away, I could put an end to this before it progressed any further. Then her mouth found mine, and all sane thinking vanished. This time the kiss was different. There was no hesitation or uncertainty. The stress we had been suppressing was all over it. The long simmering longing for something. Without thinking, I returned the kiss. I put my hands on the couch. I'm holding on to the fabric to stay grounded. It had nothing to do with affection or love. It has to do with necessity. A need that neither of us could suppress, raw and scorching. My heart pounded. I couldn't make sense of the jumble of ideas in my head. That was all I knew at the time. There was no going back. When we eventually parted ways, we were both out of breath. Our foreheads were pressed together. The air was heavy with the weight of what we had just done. However, neither of us took any action to interrupt the moment. We must halt, I repeated. Even so, my voice was feeble. Not being convinced, Jessica gave a nod. My flesh feels the warmth of her breath. Am aware, she muttered. But it's really difficult, is it not? I didn't answer. Nothing else could be said. We had woven this web and were stuck in it. And we had to quit no matter how much we told ourselves. We kept getting pulled back together by the attraction between us. That's when it occurred. Once more she leaned into me. And we were unable to stop it. Everything happened so fast. As thrilling as it was for me too. She seemed unconcerned. Once it was finished, she gave me a smile. She told me how much she loved it. The days that followed went so quickly. We made an effort to appear normal. Made an effort to act as though nothing had occurred. But there was no denying the tension between us. Each time I saw her, I experienced the same hot rush. That same perilous pull. We appeared to be circling one another, awaiting the time when we would at last yield once more. And I was aware that it would happen eventually. One night, when my father left for work late, there I was in the kitchen. I'm attempting to divert my attention by preparing dinner. However, the house seemed eerily quiet. I also had trouble focusing. All the noises seemed to reverberate, reminding me of the seriousness of our actions. At first, I didn't hear her enter, but when I looked back, she was there, inclining toward the doorframe. With the same unreadable look, they watched me. "Do you need assistance?" she inquired. Her tone was informal. However, something underlying it caused my heart to race. "Well, I'm doing fine," I said. Even so, my hands were trembling. She approached me, getting too close. Her presence was tremendous. "Are you certain?" I took a deep breath. "I'm attempting to study myself, Jessica. We are unable to." Got begun. However, she interrupted me. "There is nothing we need to do." Softly, she said. Her gaze met mine. "However, I believe we both understand where this is headed." Between us, the words lingered, final and heavy. I wanted to argue, wanted to inform her that she was mistaken. But in my heart, I knew I couldn't. I was aware of her correctness. We were silent as we stood there. With each second that goes by, the distance between us gets smaller. And before I knew it, she was giving me another kiss. Happened quickly. Nearly a moment. However, it was sufficient to rekindle everything we had been attempting to suppress. My chest was thumping with my heart. And I was aware that this was just the start. The ensuing weeks were a haze of snatched moments and quick looks. It felt as though two different realities were present. One in which everything appeared to be typical. And another where I was always on the edge of something we couldn't control with Jessica. Our secret was a terrible burden. However, we were unable to avoid one another. I kept telling myself that it had to end. Something we must halt. Continued. My dad always stayed out late or left for work. Our relationship became more tense. She and I would be in the same room. Without uttering a single word. Both of us would be aware of the following step. The ease with which we had fallen into this was horrifying. Every contact. It seemed like we were going over some unseen boundary with every glance. However, it was never sufficient to cause us to retreat. Rather, we found ourselves drawn to one another, as though we were being led down this path by something greater than ourselves. An afternoon on a Saturday. The house's air felt particularly heavy. My dad wouldn't return till late because he was at a business function. As soon as I woke up that morning, I could sense the change. The silent expectation, which had been too familiar. While the hours passed, I had a nagging suspicion that something was going to happen. Something from which we could not return. When I entered the kitchen, Jessica was there. With her back to me, I washed dishes. However, she didn't flinch when I walked in, so she must have known I was there. For a moment, I watched her from the door, uncertain on what to say or do. We were caught in a bizarre dance that had become commonplace, and I was too familiar with the steps. After turning off the faucet and using a towel to clean her hands, she turned to face me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The quiet was deafening, full with all the things we didn't say. "Are you all right?" she inquired. She said softly. She looked into my eyes. No, I wasn't. It was a long time since I had been. However, how could I acknowledge that? How could I describe the blazing tempest inside of me? The never-ending conflict between right and wrong? "I'm not sure." Last I answered. I could hardly hear myself. Jessica came over to me, halting a short distance away. "I've been contemplating," she started. She spoke slowly and deliberately. "Perhaps we ought to discuss what has been going on." I stiffened. I wasn't sure I wanted to talk to this person. What could we say that our actions had not already said? She wasn't going to back down, though. I also knew I couldn't stay away from it indefinitely. "What is there to discuss?" I inquired. "My heart is pounding." She let out a sigh, rubbing the back of her palm across her forehead. "I'm not sure. Perhaps we should determine the direction of this. We cannot continue to live this way, acting as though it's not real." She was correct. I didn't want to hear it, though. "In your opinion, where is it headed?" I inquired. I spoke more sharply than I meant to. Jessica winced a little but kept her gaze fixed on him. "I'm not sure," she acknowledged. "However, I am aware that we cannot continue to skirt the issue." One hand swept through my hair. Anger is rising within me. "What are you looking for from me?" I lost my temper. Not because I felt resentful of her. However, I also didn't have the answers. "Would you like me to state that this is acceptable?" "That's okay with me. Since I'm not. None of this is acceptable to me." She took a step closer as her face softened, reducing the gap between us. "You shouldn't accept it, in my opinion." Silently she said, "All I ask is that you be truthful with yourself." Alongside me. I understood exactly what she meant, so her words were like a kick to the gut. I had spent so much time deceiving myself. I kept telling myself that if we ignored it long enough, this phase will come to an end. However, the reality was, I was thinking about her all the time. I was obsessed with her. And the harder I fought it, the more powerful it got. I have no idea how to accomplish that. I acknowledged. My voice cracked. "I'm not sure how to be truthful about this." Jessica extended her hand, softly leaning against my arm. It was a touch that chilled me, and I detested my intense need for it. "It's all right," she muttered, her eyes become enlightened. "Together we'll figure it out." Something inside of me was broken by the sincerity in her voice. And before I knew it, I was drawing her in. I kissed her as if it were the only thing that kept me rooted. This time, it wasn't a hasty or desperate kiss. It was slow and methodical, as though we were both attempting to grasp something that was slipping out of our grasp. When we eventually parted ways, I pressed her forehead to mine. We remained silent as we stood there. The tiny gap between us mingled our breaths. Her heartbeat was rapid and irregular, and I could feel it, the same as mine. "What are we doing?" I muttered. Not to her but to myself. "I'm not sure," she answered quietly. "But I'm unable to quit." I couldn't either. As the days went by, whatever this was, we sank deeper. Our time together became very heated. More often. Until it seemed that being with her was the only time I was really myself. It couldn't last, I knew. I knew that ultimately something had to give. However, I wasn't yet prepared to deal with that. Then one night, it all fell apart. In the living room I was seated. Television is on. However, it was muted. My mind is far away. My dad was supposed to be out late again, and Jessica was upstairs. However, I was oblivious to the time. I was too preoccupied with myself, considering all that we have done, and all we were unable to reverse. I was startled out of my reverie by the noise of the front door opening, and I froze for a second. My chest began to rise with panic. My dad came home earlier than I had anticipated. I rushed to my feet, But before I had a chance to respond, he had entered the living room already. His gaze swept over the room before settling on me. "Hello." "Oh," he said. He spoke casually, yet there was something in his voice that I couldn't quite identify. "What are you doing?" "Only viewing television," answered. My voice was strained, attempting to conceal the panic. I was aware of my heart pounding. Like a live wire, the guilt is eating away at me. He appeared to be unaware. Or perhaps he did, but he was ignoring it. He took a seat on the sofa, scrolling through the channels as if it were a typical evening. I made an effort to relax, to persuade myself that all was well. However, I felt the weight of what we were concealing bearing down on me, choking me. After a few minutes, Jessica descended the stairs. Her expression was deliberately neutral. She greeted my father as if nothing had happened, as if everything were completely normal. However, her fidgety hands at her sides and the strain in her gaze were visible to me. That night's dinner was agonizing. It was a stilted conversation. And each time my father talked, the walls were closing in on me. I was unable to look Jessica in the eye. I was only able to concentrate on the knot of fear that was growing in my chest. I hoped we could get through the evening without any problems. That perhaps we could maintain the facade for another evening. But while the table was being cleared, suddenly my father turned to face me. His face was unreadable. "Jessica and you have been spending a lot of time together lately." "Oh," he said. His tone was calm but inquisitive. My heart stopped beating. I looked at Jessica, who had turned pallid. Her eyes widened in terror. "Suppose I do." I stumbled. "I'm trying to speak steadily." My father looked at me for a long time. Additionally, I sensed a change in the room's atmosphere. "Do you have anything to share with me?" he inquired. His voice remained informal. However, there was something about it that chilled me. My mouth opened to answer. However, nothing was said. My thoughts were racing, looking for something, anything that would put an end to all of this. However, I was unable to locate the words. I was unable to lie. Not with the truth between us looming large, so near to being revealed. Jessica touched me beneath the table. Silent appeal. However, it merely exacerbated the guilt. "Oh." Last I muttered. I could hardly hear myself. Nothing. For a long period my dad remained silent. His inscrutable eyes simply stared at me. As well as during that quiet. He knew too, I knew. As I was standing there, I felt the pressure of his eyes on me. I understood that what had started could not be stopped. Even if they didn't say anything. The reality remained. Awaiting. And no matter how hard I tried to outrun it, it would still follow me.